Welcome back to Cinema Flicks Music Picks. I'm Davey, your host with the most, the beast with the least. The least we can do to... Excuse me, I'm waiting on a call. Better take it. Pennsylvania 65000. Yep. No, it's always nice to hear from you. As long as you enjoyed yourself. Okay, same time tomorrow? Alright, take care. Bye. One of those heavy breathers. We've become quite friendly over the past year or two. Every night he phones. Glad to help a brother out, is all I can say. So we're going to be looking at the Glenn Miller story, which is from 1953, I want to say. You can tell I've done my research terribly well. Yes, 1953. See, who needs research when you've got knowledge? Directed by Anthony Mann, wouldn't you know, who we've obviously been looking at quite a bit in the period. The 50s were a period where Jimmy worked extensively with Anthony Mann and Alfred Hitchcock. But this, of course, is the story of the famous, world-famous, legendary bandleader, composer, arranger, Glenn Miller, who looks remarkably nothing like Jimmy Stewart, but nonetheless. And June Allison, who was Jimmy's 3-time wife in films. The Stratton story and what was the other one? Oh, I can't remember. But they were Strategic Air Command, I want to say. Don't quote me on it, but I think that's the one. So they were well used to playing husband and wife. So there ain't a lot to go into here. If you know the Glenn Miller story in real life, you know roughly the Glenn Miller story. So it's a biopic. We've seen a billion of these in the subsequent years. It's quite interesting though, if you watch biopics from before this period and then you watch ones after this period, this very much sets a trend where we see the down on their luck, we see what causes them to be, you know, penniless, we see them make their fame and fortune, and we see the sad part that makes a story worth making a story. You know, we see a dramatic incident. So you can add in Walk the Line, Ray, but the big ones I'm thinking of, for rather obvious aviation reasons if nothing else, the Buddy Holly story with Gary Busey, and La Bamba with Lou Diamond Phillips. Don't want to get that name wrong. Cindy, you're a massive Lou Diamond Phillips fan. So yeah, it's Glenn Miller's life story, kind of. It follows it, kind of, and makes him kind of more sympathetic character than he actually was in real life. Not that he was a bad guy at all, but from what I've read, because actually I have done a bit of research, so yeah, he was just a bit distant. So in this, they portray him as quite flighty. You know, when he's trying to hook up with June Allison, doesn't bother him that she's already engaged. Doesn't bother him that he's not actually proposed. He tells her to get on a train and come to New York. We're getting married this afternoon. So he's flighty, he's eccentric. In real life, he was more distant and more withdrawn. Some of his own people, because a bit like Thomas Edison had a factory where these great scientists would work for him, and anything they came up with he would get a patent on. Glenn Miller employed other arrangers to work under his umbrella, and he would, you know, it would all come out under the Glenn Miller Orchestra. They would be credited as writers, but he'd be the arranger. So in that regard, some of his most famous hits he didn't actually write. You know, songs we really associate with Glenn Miller to this day, In the Moods, and he did do Moonlight Serenade, I want to say, yeah. But yeah. So, not that I'm saying this, you know, he was stealing credit, that was just the way things were with big band leaders, and still is very much to this day. If you come up with parts of a song, solos that make a song, it doesn't matter if you didn't write the main melody or the lyrics, you ain't getting a credit. You know, the session guys don't get that. So it was back then as well. The aspect of the film that it leans on most heavily is Glenn Miller's relationship with June Allison, with his wife, and how they kind of support each other through the rise, and the struggles to get there, constantly believing in each other and believing in his muse. He knows there's a sound, he can hear it in his head. He's Anthony Mann, driven. You've heard these words quite a few times in the past week from me, but this is in a different context. He's not driven by revenge or bloodlust. He's driven because he's got this sound in his head, and no matter what band he plays with, no matter what players he hires, he just can't quite get it. It's all in there, but he doesn't know how to, he can write it, but it never sounds quite right when it comes out. So he's just trying to find that muse that he knows will connect. And the way the film presents it is that it was a happy accident, that one of his 4 horn players bust his lip, and Glenn says, well, we'll try a clarinet as the lead instrument. And everybody, you're crazy, you fool, it'll never work, I tells ya. Not in this down belly. And wouldn't you know, it works to great success. Again, it's taking a few liberties. That didn't quite happen. Glenn Miller did play around with sounds quite a bit, but he wasn't that much of the innovator that the film makes him out to be. According to this, he really reinvented jazz, which is kind of true, that he brought it to the dance halls and things for white people, which also is very much an undercurrent in this, where there's not many black faces. So Louis Armstrong's in it, and he's about one of the only ones in the whole movie. So for a jazz movie, it's not very authentic jazz, but it does kind of present the idea that Glenn Miller was the guy who brought jazz to the teenagers, and this film came out the year before Elvis Presley went nationwide. So it's probably the last time that you could have made this film into a gigantic hit before it would seem like a passé subject matter. An older crowd would have went to see it still, but teenagers wouldn't have identified with Glenn Miller when they've suddenly got Elvis and they're watching Elvis, and they're all coming out the woodwork, Jet Li and Johnny Cash, Eddie Cochran, a couple of years later, all these early rock and roll greats, and Carl Perkins, and all the greats from Sun Records. Everybody in Memphis seemed to get a record deal about that time. So just a year later, if this film had come out and it was a smash hit, if it had come out a year later, it might not have done that well. I don't, that's my theory on that. So it was perfect timing for this to come out. It was just that year before the teenage boom, the teenage explosion. It's the same year as like The Wild One with Brando. So it's just before Teenage Rebellion just blasts off. So yeah, I think it got in there just before it became passé. And wonderfully, Jimmy, once again, like the other Anthony Mann movies we were talking about, accepted a percentage of the profits rather than a salary, and instead of ending up with about 300 grand, walked away with 2.5 million. Whew, that'll do. Which in 1954 was quite a pretty penny. It's quite a pretty penny today, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, it's a slight movie. There's not much to it. He's going to find the sound because Glenn Miller's an immortal. The tunes. I mean, even anybody who doesn't know Glenn Miller, if they hear everybody knows. Everybody knows In the Mood. Everybody knows Moonlight Serenade. Everybody knows, Pennsylvania 65,000, as we were rudely interrupted earlier by my friend. So these songs are still evergreens. They're used in films and whatnot all the time, especially now they're out of copyright. But yes, it's not a film that's meant to surprise. It's meant to show a kind of behind the scenes of a great man's life. who was still very fresh in the memory. He'd only died 10 years before this. This is not a spoiler, is it? That Glenn Miller went missing in the English Channel. His plane went missing, and there's numerous theories, but the most common one is that it was simple. She'd never have flown in that kind of fog, and the engines froze at the altitudes, and the pilot couldn't see where he was going, and down they went, leaving quite a hole, but also quite a legacy for Glenn Miller. And propaganda being as it was, that was on December the 15th. It wasn't announced to the public for 10 days because they didn't want to ruin people's Christmas. Yeah, I'm sure that would have been fun for the Miller family to keep secret. But one of the great things about it, though, taking away the tragedy of the real life events, and it is tragic. Although I said he was a cold and distant person as a band leader, by all accounts he was a legitimately great father and husband and a nice guy, just a regular Joe, but not quite the wonderful to puppies and plays with kittens and saves orphans from burning buildings the way this film kind of makes it. But one of the great things about this film is that because it is so soon after the real life events, we get to see real jazz musicians who did know and did play with Glenn. So we have Gene Krupa in here doing some very, very bad miming to his own fantastic drum playing. You're hearing Gene Krupa play a very Gene Krupa drum solo, but he's hitting about two. It's pretty much a little wooden soldier drum, but when you hear it in the soundtrack, it's insane. Louis Armstrong's great in it. He does a fantastic version of Basin City Blues. It's mimed, but it's Louis Armstrong, so who cares? And he was a very natural presence on screen, as we know, right through to Hello Dolly. So it's always great to see Satchmo. There's a whole host of Francis Langford was in it. I want to say that who was the band that were in it? Oh, it was like a vocal group. It wasn't the Chordettes, but it was a band like that. Not the Jordanaires, that was Elvis's guys. But a band like that, kind of the Andrews Sisters kind of thing. So there was lots of contemporaries of Glenn who came back to do the wartime years that they'd spent in Europe 10 years later to play the parts again, which is kind of bizarre. Imagine in Walk the Line if Elvis was played by Elvis somehow, or Carl Perkins and by Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison by Roy Orbison, these kind of things. Quite bizarre, but it happens here. It's really cool to see, and they fit in great. Jimmy put in a lot of work. He couldn't pick up the instrument at all to save his life. He couldn't pick up the horn, but he did his best to get the motions right so it would look right in the miming. He spent a lot of time practicing that. And he was worried that his accent, because he couldn't do a different voice, he never really did different voices. And it was Anthony Mann that said to him, "Don't worry about it, your name's on the poster, you're Jimmy Stewart. All that people are going to care about is Jimmy Stewart, Glenn Miller, I'm buying a ticket." They know they're not seeing the actual Glenn Miller. You put on the glasses, but slick your hair back a little more than normal, you'll be fine. And so it proves to be. He's everything you need from Jimmy to play the part. Funnily, they don't have him in glasses in the main picture, but he is there. So yeah, there isn't terribly much to go into with this. It's just a really sweet little tale, and again, it very much sets a template for La Bamba and the Buddy Holly story, complete with the ending. Obviously, Richie and Buddy died in plane crashes as well, so obviously that part of the end is going to be true. But even the way it builds up, where we spend 5 minutes at the airport with them, and we don't see it gratuitously, we're not on the plane with them at any point, we hear about it third hand. So there's no mawkishness, there's no salaciousness. We don't hear the conversation when June Allison's informed that he's been lost at sea. We don't hear another conversation that takes place where she's miscarried and been told that she can never have her own children, they'll have to adopt. The camera cuts as if, give them their moment, because again, she was still alive when this film was made. Harry Morgan's back, has been the villain in a few of the Anthony Mann, Jimmy Stewart movies, but Harry Morgan's here. He's absolutely fantastic as Jimmy Stewart's best buddy, his piano player. He's got quite a large part, really. He's with him till the end, and it's got a lovely light touch of comedy as well. Obviously, we know the tragedy's coming, but there's a lovely light touch of comedy where he's having to constantly hawk his instruments to try and subsidise himself to keep pursuing the sound, and doesn't want to get a real job. He wants to keep going for the sound, but he just can't quite get it. And he's having to work in orchestra pits and things, and he doesn't want to have to do that, but he knows that sound's out there and he has to find it. So, you can say, oh well, it's not that accurate, maybe I shouldn't check it if I haven't seen it, but we've already covered Liberty Valance at the start of the month, and the famous quote from the end of that is, when the fact becomes legend, print the legend. Well, to me, print the legend, that's what you get here. The legend of Glenn Miller. If it's not 100% Glenn Miller, it's the essence of what the public want from Glenn Miller. So if it's not quite the guy he was to his orchestra, to his bandmates, it's 90%. It's maybe not the 10% where it was a bit standoffish and quite rude to other people's arrangement skills, and it was just a bit eccentric, but not in the flighty way that they portray him here. And then I was reading about quite a few appraisals of Glenn Miller, and this film, it seems, is responsible for a lot of jazz critics seem to blame this film almost for Glenn having a more increased place in the history of jazz music than he probably deserves. Because this was such a massive hit, it kind of brought these songs back to life. The soundtrack album to this sold millions and millions of copies. It was a massive hit as well as the movie. So it kind of brought Glenn Miller back from the dead for a while, which is... and there are other people that have countered that and said, no, those arrangements, even if they aren't, we're not talking Miles Davis stuff here, we're not talking about something that completely deconstructs jazz and brings it up from the ground. We're not talking top tier, but he definitely deserves his place in history. I'm not well versed enough in jazz. We can ask my buddy Dave Kaufman about that, but certainly for me, I'm happy enough with maybe the 10 tracks of Glenn Miller that I'd know by ear. To say that's Glenn Miller, I'm happy enough to say, who am I to doubt that he's a legend and what he could have achieved perhaps. So as always, it's not just what they have achieved, it's what they were robbed of by being lost so young. What would Buddy Holly have done if he'd lived? I mean, he was only in his early 20s. What would he have done when the Beatles came over? Would he have done a Carl Perkins and just stayed around and kind of went more country and been nice and kind of faded and always solid but never spectacular? Or would Buddy Holly have rolled with the times and kept as relevant and as rocking as ever? Fascinating. We'll never know. Somewhere there's a universe out there where we can see all the art that these guys would have made, and we can just imagine in our head. But anyway, that's my little look at the Glenn Miller story. It's a lovely little film. Do you know what it is? It's what I like to call a Sunday afternoon film, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, as in it's fluffy or it's trite. It's just a cosy Sunday film, duvet on, just watching a Sunday and have a nice time, get hanky ready for the end, but and then just enjoy the music. So it's nice, and that's often used to mean bland, but it's nice in the nicest possible way. So yeah, and Jimmy made $2.5 million, so hey. Well, I won't keep you. Thank you very much for your attention as always. I was going to say that I don't know what we're going to be covering tomorrow, but I had a look over there and I think my neighbour's up to something. I'm going to get my binoculars. Who knows what we'll cover tomorrow, but maybe that'll play into it. I'll get my eyes on them. Anyway, until then, do me a favour, stay very safe out there. No flying in bad weather, please. Love and mercy, my dears. Love and mercy.